I started considering, after seeing some of the stories about legislation and now, of course, policies pretty long since established about hate speech and anti-Semitic, this, that, and the other. And there's things that so the Republican Party is starting to make they no longer have a problem. There we go. They no longer have a problem with this idea of being, assailed or their ranks being corrupted by the Jew-hating anti-Semites. They have now made the absolute decision that what they plan to have is a legal remedy by which they can judge words for their level of hatred. I guess it's maybe a 1 through 10, probably something more like 1 through 7 scale, to keep it kosher, so to speak. No, but let me make sure I try to stay nice and slow, let the heat creep in. That's what I always think of. Oliver down there in the deep south, deep south. He's such a fascinating character, and I just think, see, that's a Southern man right there. See, that's you see, when you're really right wing, that's a Southern man right there. Anyway, and so I always think of when it gets hot in the summer. I think, see, he would be giggling. He'd be finally like, boy, it's finally a normal temperature in this mud hole, this mud puddle of a fucking state. But yeah, no, he probably wouldn't be that cruel. But he'd probably have some colorful language for Oregon, or at least urban Oregon. I bet he would love the outdoors here. Everybody would love the outdoors is what captures everybody here. It's just getting the time and getting some kind of conveyance to get out in the outdoors. Yeah, and we're taking the time, like me walking the slow, seeing if the duckies are doing their thing. Oh, by the way, what was it? I forget if I actually got video of it. The duckies were sitting in the middle of the parking lot at 6:30 in the morning. And it was like a boyfriend-girlfriend thing, them just sitting there. And it was so cute. I thought I shot it. I don't know if I uploaded it. I got to remember if I did that. It was pretty cute. So, what? Oh, there we go. Boom, the mighty mallard. Look at that. Mighty duck. Okay, so anyway, I bet it didn't even catch it. It's probably hella retarded. So the way that was something I was thinking about this, the anti-Semitism bills and all these things about you can't criticize Israel and this and that are happening in legislation. This is really something that is a holdover. This is a silent generation holdover into the baby boomers and beyond. It's not necessarily it's not bad intention. It's not a terrible idea. We'll look back on it and be like, but you can't really judge speech this way out of context, and this isn't going to work. So why did people do this? And it's like, yeah, for the best of intentions, and that's how that works, for the best of intentions. But something that is going to inevitably now come up is that there is now this issue of sort of feminism itself, and now you actually have, Mariska Hargitay, and that's a person who there's no way around. Everyone loves Mariska Hargitay, everyone. She's like Ripley from fucking Alien, It's just, she's one of these people who you just are like, that's a well done female character. Just flat out, just a very well done character, and played well by somebody who played the character well. So her complaints now about, look at what happened with Weinstein, and, you know, that the legal system seems to be completely incapable of dealing with now crimes against women. And especially men being able to obviously predate on women, obviously. And that, so it's now interesting that the ideologies, one of the things about the alternative right that nobody wants to really discuss, because now it's not, nobody wants to be like, oh yeah, they kind of were talking about how something like this was going to happen to the Democrats at some point. That the alternative right didn't like the Republicans' stance with Israel and alignment with them. It got confused with a lot of people who were just plain out, you know, far right, the brand blog, if you know the term. So not many of you might know that term, but so I mean, like, but then there was other people who they really were genuinely of some legitimate conservative cultural background view, and they were like, but I can't agree with how we're funding this state and what it's doing. They became the alternative right. The Republicans would have nothing to do with such conservatives because you can't question Israel. Why can't you question Israel? Because of the evangelicals, and specifically the theology of American Protestant evangelicals. That's what hardened some success for the Republicans, gave them a base to work from. But the problem is Catholics, especially old Catholics, and you know, these ultra-trad kind of cats, and many of them exist. It's that they still do it the old-fashioned way where they're from. And then with the Orthodox, there was no, I mean, I've even heard an Orthodox priest have to express, he's like, no, the Protestant theology around the book of Revelations is a study all on its own. We don't understand where you guys get any of it. And so it's, yeah, and so, that understanding of Israel's role on the right as something in time, space, and outside of time, space, that would determine the outcome of the end of days, that became a definitive part for a huge section of the Republican Party. And what's happened is slowly these people had children, and their children started asking very important questions about, like, okay, you know, like, first there was this plain out doubt, you know, that these would have been people that would have been, usually I detected as the years have gone on, about 4 years younger. So these are guys about 45 and younger, and they were doing these blogs where they were now doubting not so much what their parents told them, but some of the ramifications and some of the assumptions. But they were good kind of conservative boys in a way. Good boys. They were good boys. But they were really like trying to find in the era of the blogosphere some kind of community that, say, had been raised evangelical, but now they were looking, you know, maybe they had done a tour, you know, in the Middle East, and they were getting familiar with the Middle East, and that they were just, that produced a lot of these people who are on the right, but they don't want to have anything to do with Israel. And that's where they stand. That there's a lot of them that's their whole thing. Just don't want to touch it anymore. Don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. Not my problem. Everyone calls them isolationists. The Republican Party as the party just hates their guts. Barely is starting to like an iceberg is slowly moving, to not try to actually actively sort of destroy these guys. These are, as I said, these are like 40-something-year-old men now, and that they came from this generation that's very internet savvy, shockingly well informed. I mean, like, that's the part that changed everything. That's why a lot of people, like the alt-right, no one ever talks about the blog, the actual blog, because they don't want, that can't, no one can know what they wrote down. No one can ever know what they wrote down, because if people were to know what they wrote down, they would at some point, like, it would be too much for them to deal with. Oh my God, these aren't just hillbillies and wackos. These are actually very, very, very astute people who did a lot of good research, and their insights on society are, that was the whole thing. A lot of us that we ended up kind of sort of weirdly adjacent to the alternative right, we were mostly watchers of it. Like, do you guys see this? Does everybody see what's happening here? Are you taking these guys seriously? And that was the big one. No one would take them in any way seriously, in a way that they should have. And now it's too late. Now it's too late. And both parties are having to deal with this. So Democrats often don't know this history. Liberals really don't know this history, because worst of all, this is working out today. Worst of all is that liberal journalists totally botched covering all this. Botched it. They murdered this story. Every story that was worth knowing. How people were slowly kind of finding out, these guys, they kind of like having a show where they just say exceedingly offensive things, or do things that are maybe not even, that are kind of quasi-legal at times. But it's interesting who shut the show down, or who claimed that they got the show yeeted, or, deplatformed, whatever. Because nobody knew this person who's an activist was working with this organization. Nobody even knew this organization existed. Things like that kept happening. And that journalists would expose this, but they would expose it like, and blah, 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 working with the such and such project. And so everybody would start looking into not just that project, but they would go into like 3 degrees of investigation on the internet. They would be all over LinkedIn. Nobody really understood that they were dealing with like high-performing people and smart guys. Because at some point you would have had to consider some of their ideas. And now you have no choice. Now what the alt-right used to talk about is now regular discussion on the forefront of quote-unquote free speech. Tucker Carlson has taken on a lot of this, really in the way that somebody like him, like, it makes sense. His shock. A lot of these ideas are shocking to him. It's really funny. Nobody really gets that about watching him as time's gone on, that he's been really shocked. He's getting pilled. He knows this idea from other probably references in history and things like that. But this is, even watching him, that you could see, it's like, no, he wasn't accepting a lot of this stuff. He would have drummed these guys out of the party. Now that everyone's turned on him, now he knows who his friends are. You're welcome. a lot of the world's going to operate along these kind of old-fashioned lines of old Chicago, unfortunately. Unless people have something, unless they work closely with other people that they feel comfortable with and close to, like kith and kin, that kind of thing. Establish a new networks of professional and personal and really it is going to be based a lot around political kind of circles and as things balkanize and divide, because there isn't a way out of that. That's been chosen as usual in the modern period by the left, by the anti-traditionals, the people who don't like tradition. They don't like the traditional religion. They prefer Marxist philosophy over anything else. It doesn't matter what you propose. They always go back like a Muslim goes to the Hadiths, Sunnah, Sirah, and Quran. The Marxist goes back to the writings of Marx. And sometimes will humor other brilliant people who were they were devoted to the socialist cause in one way or another, or they are associated with socialists and such. But I mean, that's unfortunately they don't do that enough. So there's all this stuff that, like, when you're debating socialists, it just very quickly they bore you. The debates bore you. Because they can't really point to a period of time when you would want to have been alive, that everybody were sharing Care Bears because of the destitution humanity was in. So it's and the lack of the understanding of an individual, sort of. But anyway, and literacy, that's another one. Most people all the time would be illiterate in the sharing Care Bear Hegelian paradise of Karl Marx. Oh, okay. Excellent. You got a place to go? All right. And so, the right had these elements of people also that were very much disapproving and even hateful of Jews. And I kind of find Jews really fascinating as a people. And one of the things that I am now starting to run into is the thing about how the intelligence and being an atheist, that high intelligence populations are very likely to have a lot of atheists in their midst when that's an idea that is very normal. And so when you look at, by any group, who's the most likely to become an atheist, it's usually Jewish people are the most likely people to become atheists of any population in the Western world. And it happens to be a thing as well, and it totally coincides with high intelligence and that tendency. So they excel in the sciences, so they recognize patterns, and that most theological argumentation at some point comes down to, well, there's obviously some kind of order, quote unquote, governing the universe. And that's where, the atheist would, at a very deep philosophical level, it's not really governing, it seems to be part and parcel of the phenomenal universe in its existence, and this is where you get into all the fascinating arguments, that the Buddha even, got into a lot, So, and the various Buddhist schools still argue. The various Tibetan Buddhist schools still argue the nature of why do we think there is something? Why does it appear there's things, and why do we think there's something there? And who are we, and what would therefore be the thinking that we are all perceiving some things in common, and stuff like that. So it's actually really interesting to read the way that the like Dalai Lama school goes into it. With the left, anti-Semitism is this thing that is this unspoken about tradition. That one, there is the thing of people who are not Jews who tend to be on the left. When you are in their confidence, say very, very disturbing things about Jews. And it just is the way it is. Black people seem to have serious issues with Jewish people, especially black people that have been exposed to them a lot in urban areas. During my lifetime, I've seen a number of black Jewish kind of riots happen, like Crown Heights and Brooklyn Heights, if I remember, were the two. Beyond this, there's then the adoption of various quasi-Islamic ideas of black mysticism, and then the black Hebrew Israelites, and what fundamentally many people in that realm, the best argument is they're like, no, they just lifted this from white Israelitist papers and said black. It's almost the same shit, and they're like, it's almost the same shit, and like word for word, like from their documents. And so I don't know. Yeah, and things like the Circle 7 Quran, most people don't know about this in Black America. So a lot of people are finding out, Black Americans have issues with Jews. Just like black women have intense issues with women of other races dating black men, and black men stepping out on women with other races. So now the next thing is that the left has then this issue that Marxist movements tend to turn on religious Jews. Even in the Soviet Union, this was the case. That eventually, even though there were a lot of these people who were of Hebrew descent, that had been key to the revolution, you end up with this problem eventually of these people turning on the Jews who remained religious, and not even in a way that they weren't doing anything that would necessarily say they would stick out. Fundamentally, that's the idea. They weren't sticking out in some way. And also the idea, too, was that the Soviet Union kind of promised this idea that it wouldn't just stamp out minorities. And this is a key thing, because this got explained by Romanian V, that he's like, oh yeah, well what they did is they did DEI. They created it. They moved millions of people all around Russia, Siberia, Mongolia, the stands, everything. They moved Russians out there. They moved those people to Moscow and all these other Leningrad and all these other places. And so they created the actual multiracial utopia that they thought America was close to, except that America was capitalist, and so it would fall. And it not only did not work, it really, 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 really did not work. There's a lot of people have even said it probably hampered the development of a lot of regions of the country, because there wasn't a kind of a natural way that certain ideas spread. There wasn't, and it was, and also you had these groups that just simply did not mix. You can't just put them together and think they're going to breed like it's some kind of, like they're just cattle, which is, of course, one of the issues about Marxists, is Marxists have this consistent cynicism that actually belies everything they think so much that they look at people as breeding work machines, to a great extent. And so they're just like, no, you just put the people together, they all have sex, dude. Just give them a little vodka, bro, you know. After work, they'll be like, yeah, you know, and it's like, actually, no. Why would you just think, what? Who are you? And where did you get such ideas about other people? So, the left in America has had also this issue of that the pro-Hamas, Palestinian Authority, they say they're for peace, but they don't, they never have anyone they can back or a movement they could back that actually, and I mean ever. I've been watching this since I was a teenager, and very, very seriously, because there were Palestinian Catholics in my school growing up, and they considered themselves Palestinian, and they did not like Israel. They openly did not like Israel. I remember there was one girl who was definitely Egyptian. I think one girl was something like Jordanian or Lebanese or something like that. They all spoke Arabic. I remember that. And they would insist on speaking Arabic. Yeah, and you know, to each other. But anyway, and they really could look kind of weird. I mean, I remember really thinking about that, because in California, there's so many Filipinos and Asians and stuff like that, that it's like, this handful of Middle Eastern girls just were a little odd looking, you know, in my memory. Now I probably wouldn't think that, but then that's what I kept thinking. That I never saw a room full of blondes until I was like an adult, practically an adult. That just didn't exist where I grew up. I think I saw one at a school far away. That kind of thing. Like when we would go elsewhere, hey, there's hella blonde people, you know. And there were not that many black people. They were very concentrated in very specific parts of San Francisco in those days. That's just where they all would live, with no understanding of why. And so one of the things about this was that I was thinking is, with the left and anti-Semitism, this is coming out of the people who are the Antifa types. This is coming out of sort of this end of it that has more to do with kind of like punk rockers and skinhead, and like anti-fascist skinhead kind of people. But they aren't those kind of people. They aren't like old punk rockers. They aren't like these old rash heads and stuff like that. These really are like genuinely just antisocial, often drug addicts. More and more that started to become really apparent if you watch the behavior a lot of the protesters, the actual body language, how much they're shouting. That, I mean, like, you can't really do that, like, that you really wear yourself out and hurt yourself after a while, like, it's just doing that constantly for days, you know. So this has been brewing for decades, actually, for about 20 years in my experience. This thing of, on the left, these people that are extremely resentful of Israel. And there's even a weird chasm that's not really spoken about among Jews in America about support for Israel. And it's interesting when they take you in their confidence what they think of each other, because it's brutal. It's real. This is a big, big deal. This is something that the alternative right wrote about at some point. Somebody was gonna have to deal with it. And then yes, of course, all of you know, there's those odd people, the Frankists, the inverters of the commandments, things like this, these weird, mystical kind of people who come from like weird messianic movements, and they have this idea of accelerating the end of the world. And nobody has good... I've collected some works on this, but I haven't gotten a chance to do a lot of reading on, especially the Frankists. But where they spread, how they spread how their philosophies ended up advancing probably into a postmodern political philosophy of some sort, or bled into it, or that's the circle that they ended up finding themselves in the long run. But these people really exist. Like, Jews admit they exist, but they admit it kind of reluctantly, because these would be people that would know about what is correct religiosity. But in some way, shape, or form, they do something, they literally do things to invert the religiosity. And it's a very uncomfortable subject. In the ones who converted to Islam in Turkey, the Donme, they're their own kind of phenomenon unto themselves, heavily associated with Ataturk. There's a bunch of people who associate them in the Islamic world with Ataturk, and the Kemalist and his system, the Kemalist system, and which was very fundamentally the basis, what the West ended up kind of modeling a lot of fascist models on and stuff like that. But it was borrowed from the Turks, borrowed from modern Turkey. Turkey led the way, and so and Ukraine was one, that also was a major. They were way big into fascism and National Socialist thinking, and now people are starting to pick up on. It seems they have their own kind of spirituality that parallels this political ideology. This has been seen in the United States here and there. But once it gets rolled up one place and it pops up someplace else, just sometimes right immediately, maybe 10 years later. And anyone who traces quote-unquote hate groups knows, like, no, really, they somehow, these certain kinds of ideologies that have to do with mystical race stuff they go away and then they pop up again. And often it's something like the military or a police fraternity, that kind of thing. Like in some circle that they're able to propagate their ideology, and they're able to kind of weave it into what that group does. Spiritual corruption is probably how the Orthodox might put it, or something. They as well, and heresy. With Christianity, it's heresy. But spiritual corruption, and so the left and the right have these elements that don't support funding Israel's military and such like. And it will be interesting to see what comes of these two ends of policy and these two kind of different groups, and how they'll interact with one another in the long run. That's all I'm just putting out there. I just want to kind of walk through this, because I'm betting I'm going to think up something in a little bit.